Judith's campaign for mayor didn't merely gather momentum, it barreled forward like a freight train without brakes, sweeping every shred of neighborhood normalcy into its path and turning what should have been a low-key local election into an all-consuming spectacle of obligation, scrutiny, and unmistakable power flexing. Once she decided our HOA would serve as her ready-made cheering section, she didn't bother with politeness or persuasion. She drafted a solidarity directive dripping with stiff governmental jargon, photocopied it on letterhead she designed to look quasi-official, complete with a faux city seal, an embossed motto about unity and stewardship, and her signature in a swooping font that looked like a politician's autograph dreamt up by a branding agency, and slid it under every door in the subdivision before dawn, the way some people deliver newspapers. The memo announced, in tones so imperious they might have been piped in from the balcony of an old royal palace, that her transition from HOA president to the inevitable next mayor required demonstrable, unflinching support from all community stakeholders. Translation: show up or else. She characterized attendance at her rallies not as neighborly goodwill, not even as civic duty, but as a contractual expectation attached to residency itself, an implied clause, she insisted, of our bylaws interpreted in the spirit of collective accountability. Reading those words over breakfast felt like finding a summons in my cereal box. I blinked at phrases like mandatory visibility and attendance metrics, thinking surely I'd slipped into some satirical dystopia. Yet Judith meant every syllable. She laid out a schedule of appearances as meticulously as a military operation: Tuesday evening fireside chats that were neither by a fire nor remotely chatty, Thursday policy preview luncheons with boxed meals we were billed for via surprise HOA surcharges, and Saturday morning unity jogs along the lakefront where she'd run just fast enough to force would-be supporters to huff responses to her platform points. She framed these events as opportunities for us to signal confidence to undecided voters, as though our cul-de-sac were the hinge upon which the entire electorate would swing. The memo reminded us, several times in bold italics, that non-participants risked being noted for disengagement, a phrase that sounded innocuous until you pictured Judith's clipboard history and her uncanny knack for turning minor infractions, like garbage cans rolled out too early, into fines, stern letters, or thinly veiled public shaming at monthly meetings. I must have reread that sentence about full participation from all residents in civic activities 3 times, each pass conjuring a louder echo of disbelief. The arrogance was surreal, like watching someone stride into a coffee shop and declare themselves emperor because they'd bought a latte. But Judith delivered her edicts with such crisp confidence, standing ramrod straight at the head of every gathering, that even her wildest overreaches felt momentarily plausible. She wielded bureaucratic language the way a magician wields misdirection, by burying naked power grabs inside paragraphs thick with policy buzzwords, strategic alignment, stakeholder synergy, optimized resource pathways, so you could almost miss the part where she was essentially commandeering our evenings, weekends, and personal autonomy. And she did it all while maintaining a smile so polished it could have been lacquered on, a smile that said she believed, truly believed, that her ascent to public office was a gift we should be grateful to unwrap. The particular campaign event Tess and I missed was slated for a Tuesday evening, a school night for families, a work night for most, but evidently the perfect hour for Judith to unveil her comprehensive fiscal revitalization agenda to a captive audience of neighbors wearing forced grins. The setting, the HOA clubhouse, redecorated with crimson and silver banners emblazoned with her surname in caps so large they could have doubled as billboard letters. I'd heard she even rented spotlights to sweep across the parking lot, the kind that crisscross the sky in old Hollywood premieres, because apparently nothing says humble public service like blinding aircraft in a 20-mile radius. She promised refreshments, though prior experience taught us that meant tepid coffee and tiny lemon bars sourced from whichever supermarket bakery gave her a promotional discount, yet another strategic partnership, no doubt. RSVPs, she stressed, were recorded and reportable, language that made declining feel less like a polite opt-out and more like dropping your name into a logbook titled Future Adversaries. We skipped it anyway, Tess citing work, real work, not the cryptic undercover sort that only later would make sense, and I assumed our absence would register as a blip, if anything at all. Instead, the fallout exploded beyond reason, spiraling into whispered accusations of sabotage, pointed stares at the mailbox, and, eventually, subtle retaliations like suddenly misfiled maintenance requests or abruptly cancelled community perks. I discovered firsthand that, under Judith's regime, missing one speech equated to less majest. Reflecting on all of this, what still rattles me isn't merely Judith's presumption that neighbors are campaign props, it's how swiftly she weaponized the soft power inherent in an HOA and inflated it into a quasi-governmental cudgel. She leveraged the fear of fines, the dread of property value repercussions, and the social pressure of front-lawn optics to turn voluntary political engagement into a compulsory show of allegiance, a kind of suburban loyalty oath. And because her memo was cloaked in officious phrasing, references to municipal compliance, community vision alignment, and anticipated stakeholder benchmarks in voter outreach, some residents capitulated without a peep, worried that non-compliance might haunt their next landscaping variance request. Others, trapped by busy schedules or childcare constraints, scrambled to rearrange their lives lest they be blacklisted. Of course, Judith framed such panic as enthusiastic turnout, spinning our collective anxiety into an illusion of grassroots momentum. Watching her operate, I realized she understood an unsettling truth. When authority presents itself with confidence and paper seals, people frequently surrender in advance, long before any real mandate exists. That night, as Tess and I sat at home instead of cheering in that fluorescent clubhouse, I tried to shake off the nagging feeling we'd just committed a social sin. Tess, unbothered on the surface, typed notes on her laptop with a calm intensity, capturing details about HOA policy scope, discretionary budget lines, and Judith's newly minted political action committee. She muttered something about documenting escalation indicators, which at the time sounded like jargon but now reads like foreshadowing carved in neon. Meanwhile, I scrolled through community group chats lighting up with photos of the event, Judith at a podium flanked by professionally printed charts showing upward arrows and bullet points, each stat labeled projected savings through synergistic governance. I spotted familiar neighbors in the crowd, Mike from across the street, arms folded but present, Keisha 2 houses down, valiantly wrangling her toddler, Mr. Lawrence the retired accountant, nodding as though the math on those charts actually added up. In message threads, you could sense the tension beneath the polite emojis, people commenting great speech, while silently thinking, did I clap loudly enough? The aftermath was swift. The next morning, an email from the HOA's compliance committee, chaired by Judith herself, naturally, arrived citing my regrettable non-attendance, phrased as though I'd violated curfew in some authoritarian state. It warned that future absences might be escalated for review, whatever ominous process that entailed. A day later, our application to repaint the porch railings, submitted months earlier, was flagged for further evaluation, a delay that felt suspiciously punitive. I mentioned the coincidence to Tess, and she arch-eyed me like I'd finally spotted the elephant in the room. Once you see the machine, you can't unsee it. Judith had built a feedback loop where political compliance greased the wheels of everyday living, and defiance sprinkled sand into every gear. By demanding attendance, she measured loyalty. By controlling HOA approvals, she enforced it. In coffee shop chats and dog park huddles, neighbors whispered about feeling cornered. Some joked that next Judith would require us to canvass door to door wearing matching shirts with her slogan, but the jokes wilted because we half believed it could happen. There was talk of forming a counter-block within the HOA, yet organizing openly felt risky when the president controlled meeting agendas and wielded bylaws like karambits. Individually, no one wanted to stand out. Collectively, the silence became consent. Judith's real genius lay not in any grand policy proposal, most of which were buzzwords stapled together, but in her mastery of micro-power, the trash can tape measure, the lawn height citation, the permit processing queue. She knew suburbanites prized harmony and property values enough to swallow indignities they'd never accept from City Hall. Looking back, I keep circling around that single memo, the inciting document that crystallized her playbook. It wasn't long, barely 2 pages of double-spaced officious prose, but every sentence dripped with the subtext of coercion. She sprinkled just enough legalese, pursuant to Section 4.3e of the Covenant, under authority vested in the Standing Committee, consistent with precedents established in Smith v. Edgewater Estates, to dazzle or intimidate anyone without a law degree. Most residents lacked the appetite to challenge her citations, and those who did often discovered the references were vague, cherry-picked, or outright invented. But by then the effect was achieved: doubt, deference, compliance. I've replayed the choice to stay home that Tuesday over and over. On one hand, refusing to be dragooned into a pep rally felt like a line in the sand, a small act of reclaiming our evenings from an overreaching neighbor. On the other hand, the cascading repercussions proved Judith's point: she commanded more leverage than we realized. It was a lesson in how fragile the boundary is between community governance and localized tyranny. All it took was a determined personality with a clipboard, a penchant for procedural jargon, and an ambition bigger than the HOA charter to turn neighborly oversight into a pressure campaign. Even now, months later, I can quote passages from that memo the way some people recall song lyrics. They haunt me because they encapsulate how easily civic language can be repurposed for control. Judith wrote of fostering participatory cohesion, but what she enforced was obedience. She touted transparent stakeholder engagement, yet operated through whispers and unrecorded subcommittee huddles. She heralded fiscal stewardship, but never released a line-item budget for the HOA's rising dues. And by conflating neighborhood compliance with political support, she blurred the line between private and public realms until speaking out about porch paint approvals felt inseparable from criticizing her tax policy. What stuns me is how quickly a Tuesday night gathering became a litmus test for allegiance, a yardstick she wielded to measure who might boost her ascent and who might, in her words, undermine community leadership. We didn't skip because we opposed her candidacy, we skipped because Tess had real work and I was exhausted. Yet our absence became, in Judith's narrative, evidence of sabotage, proof that dissent lurked behind every closed curtain. And that redefinition of normal life into a political chessboard is precisely why the memo lingers in my mind like a bad aftertaste. It illustrated, in a few neatly typed paragraphs, the dark alchemy by which power magnifies small choices until they carry the weight of rebellion. So yes, I had to read that sentence 3 times, maybe more, because embedded in those words was the revelation that our quiet lakeside dream had boundaries drawn by someone else's ambition. Judith's ability to wrap raw control in the velvet ribbon of community engagement still astonishes me. She didn't need a police force or a city council majority, just the collective fear of fines, the administrative choke points of HOA bureaucracy, and a memo printed on fancy paper. Missing that one Tuesday speech might seem trivial, but in her carefully curated ecosystem of authority, it was tantamount to stepping off the parade route while the band was still playing. And in the months that followed, I learned the hard way how an HOA president with mayoral aspirations could turn absence into accusation, silence into dissent, and a neighborhood of reasonable adults into bit players in her personal campaign saga. Tuesday night's gathering, marketed with almost evangelical fervor under the slogan "Meet Your Future Mayor, 7 p.m. sharp," was supposed to be a simple HOA-sponsored chat in the clubhouse, yet Tess had circled the date with such anticipation you might have thought front row seats came with backstage passes and pyrotechnics. 4 days she kept gushing that hearing Judith's fiscal priorities firsthand would be invaluable, that delving into the fine print of a would-be mayor's spending plan was, in her words, civic due diligence. I found the fixation puzzling. Since when did my wife, normally allergic to small-town theatrics, feel compelled to audit line items and vendor relationships like an auditor on a caffeine bender? But life has its own momentum, so I shrugged, promised I would tag along, and figured the evening would deliver little more than lukewarm coffee, stiff folding chairs, and Judith's trademark PowerPoint barrage about potholes and playground refurbishments. Then real life detonated. An urgent client crisis yanked Tess into a marathon phone call that devoured the entire early evening block. She pressed her palm to the headset MIC, whispered that I should go solo, and handed me a notepad marked budget highlights in block letters. Listen for anything on municipal contracts, she urged, eyes already refocusing on her laptop's cascade of spreadsheets. The request struck me as oddly granular. No normal neighbor cared whether grass cutting or garbage pickup contracts were competitively bid, but I chalked it up to Tess's professional DNA. She lived and breathed rules, so maybe poking at a would-be mayor's numbers gave her a thrill. Yet fatigue weighed heavier than curiosity, so I stayed put, fired up leftovers for dinner, cued a mindless action flick, and let the campaign carnival roar on without us. Wednesday dawned with what I assumed would be blissful normalcy, until I opened the front door and spotted a sheet of thick cream stock taped dead center like a sheriff's notice from the Old West. Each line was machine-typed, impeccably justified, and peppered with scolding phrases about civic responsibility, collective morale, and the binding nature of neighborhood solidarity. At the bottom, in bold italics that practically groaned under their own self-importance, sat the flourish, respectfully, Judith Pike, HOA President and mayoral candidate. My first reaction was an incredulous snort, who sends passive-aggressive ransom letters for missing a stump speech. But the longer I reread those sentences, the more the humor curdled into something harder to swallow. Tess appeared behind me, phone still in hand, scanned the page, and without a word snapped a photo. Evidence, she murmured when I raised an eyebrow. In case escalation requires legal remedies. I assumed she meant harassment or defamation suits, the usual civilian artillery. I did not realize her battlefield was several weight classes higher. Escalation arrived faster than overnight shipping. Within 48 hours Judith began dialing neighbors as if rallying a moral militia. Mrs. Henderson, our soft-spoken retiree next door, caught me grabbing the mail and sheepishly recounted her exchange. She asked if you and Tess were the kind of residents who appreciate strong leadership, the poor woman stammered. I told her you two keep to yourselves, pay dues on time, and your lawn looks terrific, but she was, well, very upset. By Friday Judith's rumor mill had metamorphosed into full-blown propaganda. She began warning residents we were potentially disruptive elements, a phrase which, spoken in her clipped tone, conjured visions of clandestine graffiti and rabid revolutionary pamphlets. It would have been laughable if the community's more anxious souls hadn't started glancing at us like we might set off fireworks indoors. Saturday punctured the thin membrane between absurdity and alarm. I was still groggy, coaxing life from the coffee pot, when a firm, official-sounding knock rattled the door. Through the side light I glimpsed two uniformed officers, one scanning the entryway, the other unobtrusively resting a thumb on her belt radio. My pulse nosedived into my stomach. What municipal code had we accidentally shredded? Failure to applaud. The senior officer, reading from a clipboard, announced, "We've received a complaint alleging disturbance of community harmony." His partner's eyes skimmed our foyer as though expecting outlaw graffiti or a keg of contraband fireworks. I stood there in plaid pajamas and slippers, speechless, heart slamming, when Tess swept in like a thunderclap in a business suit. "Officers," she began, voice razor sharp, "what statutory provision defines community harmony, and which section of the penal code authorizes this visit?" She demanded case numbers, complaint documentation, and clarification of probable cause with an authority that seemed to shrink the officers by several inches. Her recital of constitutional rights rolled off her tongue so fluidly you'd think she taught the Bill of Rights for sport. The lead officer faltered, shuffled his paperwork, mumbled something about just following up. Tess countered with a reminder that filing false police reports constituted a misdemeanor in our state. Within moments the pair retreated, half apologizing, half baffled, and trudged back to their cruiser. The door clicked shut, and Tess began pacing like a general recalibrating battlefield tactics. That was the first time I realized the woman I married spoke fluent law enforcement. I had heard glimpses before, offhand terms like probative value or burden of proof, but her poise under pressure felt different, honed, almost military. When I asked for explanation, she blamed client crises. Yet later, through the thin veil of night, I caught fragments of her next phone call: "Cover is compromised, subject has initiated hostile measures, if escalation persists we may need to extract." The word extract stuck to my mind like a burr. Lawyers remove files, maybe remove motions, but extraction sounded like covert ops jargon. I lay staring at the ceiling, weighing possibilities. Was Tess the world's most melodramatic attorney, or something else entirely? The fallout bifurcated our world. Judith doubled down on HOA tyranny while Tess plunged into an investigative tailspin far beyond mere legal self-defense. On Judith's front, every petty regulation turned into ammunition. She arrived unannounced with a ruler, documenting our grass height to the millimeter. She filed violation notices because our recycling bin sat precisely 6 inches beyond an arbitrary line at the curb. One morning I stepped out to find her crouched near the garden hose like a surveyor verifying the curvature of the earth, tape measure stretched, brow furrowed. She fined us for a doormat allegedly exceeding 2 feet by 3 feet, ours was 2.5 by 3, and cited an obscure bylaw she'd unearthed to justify the absurdity. I oscillated between rage and disbelief, yet Tess greeted each citation with what looked like satisfaction. "She's showing her true colors," my wife commented, snapping high-resolution photographs of every notice before filing them in a meticulously labeled accordion folder. While I wrestled with rising anxiety, Tess transformed the dining room into what could only be described as a forensic command center. Documents stacked in neat towers. Laptops sprouted cables and secondary monitors. She scrutinized 5-year municipal budgets line by line, compiling spreadsheets so complex they resembled flight sim cockpit dashboards. Relationship matrices sprawled across poster boards, red yarn linked names of city officials, blue lines tracked construction firms, green pins flagged suspicious consulting fees. She unearthed routing numbers, cross-checked vendor databases, and assembled timelines that mapped cost overruns across 3 separate municipalities, all roads bending back toward Judith's professional orbit like iron filings to a magnet. "How exactly did you pull all this?" I finally asked, pointing to a binder containing Judith's employment history, tax liens, and litigation footnotes dating back 15 years. Tess, eyes still scanning her screen, replied, "Public records are more accessible than you'd think." Technically true, but the depth and organization of her whole felt less like freedom of information scavenging and more like the output of an investigative agency with subpoena power. Each chart was color-coded by risk tier, every transaction had a notation referencing statutory caps or procurement thresholds. She wasn't building a harassment case. She was engineering a prosecutorial dossier. When I pushed, "Is this really about Judith's doormat vendetta, or is there a bigger picture?" Tess paused long enough for silence to answer in her stead. Then she murmured, "Sometimes rot hides behind small offices. Root it out early and you spare the entire city." That cryptic reply opened a sinkhole beneath my assumptions. Who was my wife, exactly? A freelance legal consultant who knew the names of federal whistleblower hotlines by heart? An ordinary attorney who could scare off cops with chapter and verse citations? Or a professional whose resume bore classified lines I had never glimpsed? The more I watched her work, the more the pieces realigned. Tess's sudden enthusiasm for the lakeside property, her insistence on this particular house, close enough to overhear HOA gossip yet unremarkable enough to blend into the background, now smacked of strategic positioning. Her friendly chats at block parties about procurement procedures turned out to be field interviews. Even her drone-like habit of photographing every community notice wasn't obsessive homemaking, it was evidence collection, building a timeline of Judith's incremental overreach. My heart panged with a cocktail of curiosity and dread. Was I living inside a deep cover sting? If so, had Judith blundered into a federal bear trap by weaponizing HOA bylaws against, of all households, the one harboring my quietly formidable spouse? Judith, oblivious to the hawks circling overhead, charged forward with her smear crusade. She slipped bulletins under doors warning we were obstructive elements jeopardizing neighborhood cohesion. At the next HOA meeting, one Tess and I skipped for obvious reasons. She reportedly projected charts claiming property values would plummet if residents tolerated anti-community actors, meaning us. Yet her theatrics ironically provided Tess with fresh ammunition. Lies broadcast publicly become demonstrable libel, misused HOA funds traceable through meeting minutes. Every scare tactic tightened the vice around Judith's own ambitions. Meanwhile, Tess's so-called overtime morphed into all-hours briefings via secure video portals. Her vocabulary shifted subtly: indictable pattern, probable misappropriation, pending grand jury slot. One night she asked me, without preamble, if I had ever noticed suspicious deliveries to Judith's house, unmarked boxes, maybe, arriving at odd hours. My startled no seemed to disappoint her, but she nodded, scribbled something, and returned to typing on a remote desktop environment plastered with Department of Justice watermarks. That was when the final domino fell in my mind. Tess was not, and had never been, merely a freelance consultant. She was, at minimum, a federal-level investigator, perhaps even an assistant U.S. attorney, embedded here on assignment. And our HOA drama, ridiculous on the surface, masked corruption with municipal tendrils worth a covert operation. This revelation reframed every moment: her calm with the police, her obsession with budgets, the cryptic calls about cover, even her initial insistence on choosing this exact house, likely a logistical sweet spot for jurisdictional or evidentiary reasons. I oscillated between pride and unease. It is exhilarating to learn your partner is quietly heroic, but disorienting to realize years of domestic tranquility contained missing chapters. Yet there was no time for existential crisis. The storm Judith had stirred now threatened to sweep the entire neighborhood, and my quietly covert spouse, into public spectacle. If Tess's inquiry sprinted toward indictment, Judith's retaliations might escalate beyond yardstick policing. My mind raced through scenarios: malicious break-ins, trumped-up city citations, media smear campaigns. Tess stayed unflappable, but her eyes flickered with calculations, risk-benefit analyses, contingency triggers, extraction timelines. Extraction. The word resurfaced, heavier than before. It wasn't theatrical flourish, it was exit strategy. Most likely it meant witness protection tiers, sealed indictments, or the abrupt relocation of undercover personnel when an investigation tips from covert to overt. I pictured black SUVs idling at dawn, packed suitcases, a note to my vintage typewriter clients explaining why their repairman vanished overnight. The possibility turned my stomach, yet backing down felt impossible. Judith had already weaponized community mechanisms. If we capitulated, would validate her autocracy and leave the wider corruption unchecked. So I buckled up for the ride, bolstering porch lights, installing security cams, and trusting Tess's steady hand guiding an operation I could barely comprehend. In a perverse twist, Judith's next wave of harassment, fines for phantom noise violations, citations for non-conforming holiday decor, late-night phone calls from anonymous concerned citizens, only deepened her paper trail of abuse. Tess filed each incident chronologically, adding witness affidavits she coaxed from other harassed neighbors. She coached Mrs. Henderson on how to record conversations. She gently prodded a landscaper into producing invoices that revealed inflated HOA kickbacks. I watched spellbound as my wife orchestrated a symphony of damning facts without raising her voice once. It dawned on me that her overtime wasn't mission creep, it was the crescendo. So here we stand, the suburban chessboard treacherously quiet before dawn breaks on whatever dramatic move comes next. The clubhouse buzzes with rumors of an emergency HOA session. My Ring camera picked up Judith talking to a man in a tailored suit who certainly isn't her realtor. Tess's laptop glows through the night, its screen filled with sealed envelope icons labeled Exhibit and Intercept. I long for simpler worries, dandelions on the lawn, postal delays, but in their place lies a complex tableau of small-town tyranny entangled with federal stakes. One choice to skip a campaign speech became the spark that lit a fuse trailing deep into city budgets and private bank accounts. If I've learned anything, it's that power magnifies every gesture. Judith inflated a missed handshake into moral treason, unaware she'd poked a sleeping dragon in blazer and blue light glasses. Now the dominoes teeter, and by the time they finish falling, Tuesday night's petty summons may read like prologue to a civic earthquake. Wherever we land, whether in the headlines or a safe house miles away, I'll forever recall that typed note on the door as the moment absurdity tipped into revelation, and my wife's quiet competence unfurled into something formidable enough to face it head-on. I had always imagined a criminal investigation as something unmistakable, a flashing squad car tableau with detectives in trench coats, evidence tags fluttering in the wind, maybe a bright yellow line of police tape. Whatever Tess was piecing together on the dining room table, though, was subtler and somehow more intimidating, a silent cathedral of paperwork, color-coded folders standing at attention like infantry, arrows and boxes on giant foam boards mapping money as it leapt across shell companies the way a river splits into hidden canals. It wasn't the neat ledger or tidy discovery packet I expected from a civil lawsuit. It looked like the preparatory war room of a congressional subcommittee. Chains of custody were annotated in red ink, timeline matrices swarmed with dates and vendor codes, and there were flowcharts so complex they reminded me of the wiring schematics in old typewriters, except instead of springs and screws these diagrams traced bribes and kickbacks. I tried to laugh off my unease. Tess, you know the FBI could roll up and use this tomorrow. You're out profiling the profilers. My attempt at humor floated in the air. Instead of joining my chuckle, she hesitated, only a beat, but long enough for the joke to wobble and crash. Finally she conjured a smile. Guess years of binge-watching crime shows are finally paying dividends, she said, pushing a strand of hair behind one ear. Her voice detected light sarcasm, yet the earlier pause pried open a door in my head. Why would someone accustomed to affectionate teasing stall before joking about television? Something was off. She shifted into explanation mode, but the cadence was not casual storytelling. It was a briefing. Subject exhibits repeated pattern of inflating municipal contracts, directing excess funds into controlled shell entities. Historical data from 3 prior city rolls show identical operational signature. Current mayoral campaign is a vector for scaling the mechanism. I blinked. Lawyers I knew didn't label people subjects, or call strategies operational signatures, and they definitely didn't talk about vectors for scaling outside of epidemiology. Tess, I interrupted, waving at the spreadsheets, you sound like you're drafting a police intelligence report. Another beat of silence, another polite half-smile. Just organizing my thoughts like any meticulous attorney, she said. Except attorneys rarely possess the transactional bank ledgers I was seeing, much less plot them on graphics that looked ready for a grand jury projector. The phone calls, too, had taken on a nighttime spy novel tenor. At 10 p.m. she'd retreat to the den with a headset, voice low but urgent. Asset is showing signs of heightened suspicion, recommend accelerating timeline, surveillance indicates at least 3 additional nodes in the network, do we have authorization for an expedited subpoena on the bank's server? When I tiptoed in asking if she ever slept, she claimed it was a multi-party corporate lawsuit with defendants scattered across time zones. Plausible, sure, but not when the jargon kept drifting toward surveillance authorizations and evidentiary control. Corporate attorneys debate discovery motions, not covert monitoring procedures. One sleepless night I padded into the kitchen for water and glimpsed her on a video call. The frame behind the person she spoke with was unmistakably institutional. Mahogany seal, eagle crest, fluorescent government hallway beyond a half-open door. The official on screen flashed a badge, gold and blue, before noticing me in the doorway. Tess slammed the laptop shut. Late night with a CFO, she said too briskly. You know how executives are. Except no CFO conducts Zoom meetings from inside a federal building labeled United States Department of Justice. In retrospect, I should have pressed harder. Instead, fear tied my questions in knots. If Tess was not who she said she was, what did that make the last decade of our marriage? A romance? A ruse? Was I a beloved partner, or a convenient disguise? The implications lurked like shapes beneath murky lake water. I kept fixing typewriters, polishing keys, and pretending everything was domestic routine while documents on our dining table morphed into a federal indictment in waiting. Eventually the tension reached critical mass. Judith's harassment scaled from petty to vindictive, and Tess's secrecy became a thundercloud in every room. One midnight I found her pacing her office, headset on, reciting evidentiary codes. When her eyes met mine, she ended the call mid-sentence. "Tess," I began, "you can't tell me this is just work stress. Not anymore." She folded her arms, chin lowered as though bracing for recoil. "How much," she asked quietly, "do you truly want to know?" My answer was instant: all of it, whatever this is. She nodded, exhaled a slow breath, then reached into the desk drawer I'd never seen unlocked. What she produced was not a decorative access pass or novelty lanyard. It was federal issue laminate, textured, weighty. Emblazoned at the top, United States Department of Justice. Beneath that, her photograph, Tessa Marie Hayward, and title, Assistant United States Attorney. The subtext read Criminal Division. I heard the refrigerator motor hum again, the mundane world still whirring as another slid into place behind my eyes. My wife was a federal prosecutor. "Everything you've suspected lately," she said, voice steady, "is real. We're here because I'm spearheading an investigation into a municipal corruption ring that siphons federal infrastructure funds. Judith Pike isn't merely a petty HOA tyrant, she's a trusted facilitator inside a network that's laundered tens of millions through municipal kickbacks." She outlined her cover. Remote consulting gave her plausible cause to request records, host video calls, and keep odd hours. I, with my unassuming repair shop, provided the picture of a normal, harmless household that wouldn't raise Judith's defenses. All those block party conversations Tess struck up about procurement? They were interviews. The photos of violation notices? Evidence of intimidation and procedural abuse. My pulse rumbled in my ears. So this whole neighborhood detour was an undercover deployment, she finished. I wasn't supposed to reveal it. But Judith calling law enforcement on us means she's scared, and frightened criminals are unpredictable. You deserve the truth before things escalate further. The avalanche of revelations tumbled on. She scrolled through databases shielded behind two-factor firewalls, showing payment trails that began as city contracts, road resurfacing, school HVAC upgrades, parks department consulting, and ended in out-of-state shell core. Each circle on her diagram represented a stolen grant, a pocketed taxpayer dollar that should have resurfaced as fresh asphalt or functional playground equipment but instead paid for beach houses and luxury sedans. The tally? More than 47 million siphoned over a decade. If Judith won the mayor's seat, Tess explained, she'd command direct authority over new rounds of federal infrastructure allocations, billions in upcoming stimulus money. Imagine giving a fox a skeleton key to every henhouse in the county, Tess said. We need to stop her before the election certifies her power. Evidence gathered thus far included signed vendor amendments, mismatched expense requests, and internal memos referencing strategic cost-sharing, code for siphoning overruns. Tess's team, an interagency task force, was almost ready to indict, but needed the final nexus, proof that Judith's campaign funds were seeded by laundered kickback cash. I turned the badge over in my hand, still reeling. Why tell me now, though? You've kept it secret for months. Tess's expression softened. Because I can't guarantee your safety if you're unaware. We believe the ring employs private security muscle, the kind that doesn't flinch at threats. If they sense I'm closing in, you could become leverage. She let that sink in before adding, besides, my feelings aren't part of an operation manual. I fell in love for real. Hiding that love behind a cover story felt wrong the moment Judith involved the police. Some selfish part of me needed to know the foundation of our life wasn't fabricated in some training manual. Was any of us ever staged? I asked. The question bruised her, I saw it. No, she said. The mission dictated I integrate. It did not dictate I marry, or laugh with you at midnight, or cry when we lost your dad. I chose those truths. She laid out the plan going forward. On Monday, she would present her evidence package to a federal magistrate, seeking sealed arrest warrants. My role? Appear routine. Keep the typewriter shop open, wave at neighbors, let Judith think we'd retreated into meek compliance. If she suspects you know, She might accelerate asset removal efforts, shredding files, moving money. Overseas, darker contingencies. I swallowed. You really think she'd resort to violence? Tess nodded once. People who steal 8-figure sums develop habits of self-preservation. And she has contacts with private contractors, some ex-military, who've previously secured job sites. We have intel that intimidation has been used in past cities to silence whistleblowers. I pictured our quiet cul-de-sac bathed in the rotating strobes of unmarked SUVs. Every barbecue, every polite nod at the mailbox now shimmered with hidden stakes. What if something goes wrong? I asked. Tess's answer was calm, rehearsed, an extraction protocol. If the task force signaled imminent threat, would leave within 30 minutes, rendezvous with marshals at a safe location, my typewriter clients none the wiser. She had a go bag, apparently they are standard for undercover attorneys as for field agents, stuffed with passports, non-sequential cash, and a prepaid phone. The idea that our life might evaporate in half an hour left me chilled, but a strange resolve pooled in my chest. Maybe it was loyalty, maybe raw adrenaline, but I wanted to help. Tell me what I can do, I said. Tess smiled, the first relaxed curve of her lips in weeks. Actually, your repair skills are useful. Judith's campaign office runs old IBM Selectrics for donor receipts, nostalgic touch for constituents. If you volunteer free maintenance, you'll gain access. Anything suspicious, ledger copies, password lists, discreetly photograph and send to this drop email. She handed me a slip with an encrypted Proton address and instructions on using a secure phone camera app. Be casual. Charge no fee, say it's pro bono goodwill. The absurdity would have been comical if the stakes weren't lethal, a vintage typewriter repairman moonlighting as evidence courier in a federal sting. Yet maybe that was precisely why it could work. Nobody searched the harmless maintenance guy's tool case for hidden flash drives. Tess also trained me on situational awareness, how to notice tailing vehicles, how to spot a concealed carry bulge, how to use mirrored windows for discrete observation. She demonstrated a code white text, a single period I could send if confronted, triggering marshals to ping our location. It was surreal, the way she swapped domestic chat for tactical briefings, yet comforting too, like discovering your partner can steer a plane in turbulence. Over the next 48 hours, our home became a dual reality set. By daylight I repaired a Selectric 2 behind Judith's reception desk, chatting about ribbon cartridges while my phone quietly scanned account files. At dinner Tess and I debated lasagna fillings like nothing had changed, though each clink of silverware felt charged, each glance a silent checksum confirming we were still in sync. Nights were for data upload. I'd slip images to Tess, who'd hash-check them, embed them into the evidence chain, and send encrypted bursts to infrastructure crime analysts in DC. I discovered 2 donor receipt ledgers listing consultancy reimbursements so large they dwarfed declared campaign expenses, a smoking gun that tied laundered kickbacks directly to Judith's political war chest. Sunday evening Tess received the go signal, warrants approved, arrest scheduled for pre-dawn Tuesday to minimize media leaks. She kissed my forehead, thanked me, and told me to sleep while she finalized coordination. I half dozed on the couch until red and blue flashes splashed across the blinds, unmarked cars first, then local cruisers brought in for optics. Lights flicked on in every house, dogs barked, somewhere a startled toddler cried. Through the front window I watched agents escort Judith out of her doorway, hands cuffed behind the blazers she'd once worn to shame us about grass height. Her face reflected disbelief, then fury. The neighbor circle she'd manipulated now stood on driveways in robes, phones raised. In that instant, the petty and the federal intersected, a suburban power trip revealed as a multi-million-dollar fraud. Later that morning, exhausted but euphoric, Tess and I stood in our kitchen as sun streamed through the window, illuminating stacks of now redundant folders. Cleanup teams will collect everything, she said, gesturing. Your help made the difference, Emery. I nodded, overwhelmed. So what happens to us? I asked. Tess squeezed my hand. Debrief, probably reassignment, for me. But reassignment doesn't have to mean uprooting us. We'll decide together. This time, no secrets. Her phone pinged, a thank you from a deputy chief. She silenced it, slipped the device in a drawer, and just like that we were 2 people in a quiet house again, the grand machinery of justice humming far away. Only the faint indentations of removed evidence boards on the dining room wall remained, reminders of how close ordinary life can sit to extraordinary intrigue. I stepped closer, touched her cheek, and felt reality settle. My wife, the federal prosecutor, the woman who loved HOA potlucks and crime show marathons, was both the person I thought I knew and someone even more remarkable. The revelations hadn't demolished our marriage, they'd expanded it, the way turning on a lamp illuminates the corners of a familiar room. There would be fallout, local gossip, a by-election, maybe reporters sniffing around, but we'd face it together, openly this time, without covert designations or code words. Tess reached for a fresh legal pad, habit, muscle memory, and then seemed to reconsider. She placed it flat, unmarked, on the countertop and smiled. For the first time in months, she said, I have no immediate briefs to draft. I grinned back, feeling lighter than I had in ages. In that case, I said, how about we plan an honest-to-goodness vacation? One where the only investigation is whether the hotel bar serves decent espresso. She laughed, genuine and unpaused, and in that sound I heard the future click into place. No yellow tape, no hidden flowcharts, just two partners, finally on the same page. There was a time when the biggest decision I had to make in a week was whether to replace or re-ink a typewriter ribbon. That was my reality, small, manageable, and satisfying in its own analog way. My life was a steady stream of typewriter repairs, ribbon swaps, and conversations with quirky small business owners. I had routines. I had peace. I had Tess. And now, suddenly, I was a federal asset in a corruption investigation. I still remember the moment the truth came crashing down like a slow-motion avalanche. I wasn't just blindsided, I was buried. The person I shared a home with, laughed with, planned a future with, my wife, wasn't just Tess, the freelance legal consultant who worked from home in leggings and oversized sweatshirts. She was something else entirely. Someone who had been living a double life, right under my nose. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, staring at the floor, while Tess stood by the window, silhouetted against the dim glow of the porch light. My voice felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. How long have you been planning this? She didn't hesitate. The investigation started 18 months ago. We identified this specific network about a year ago. And moving here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That was part of building the case. I blinked. It was almost too much to comprehend. So, all of this? Our house, our neighbors, everything we've built here, that was all part of the mission. She looked at me, her expression pained. Our relationship was never part of the cover, she said, but I had to ask the question that had been gnawing at me since the moment she confessed, do you actually care about me? Or am I just another part of the operation? That question sat between us like a loaded weapon. Her eyes softened, and for a second, I thought she might cry. She didn't. But the pain on her face was real. Emery, I volunteered for this assignment because of you. It was a way to do my job and still have a real life with you. I've been lying to the neighbors, to the community, to everyone, but the hardest part has been lying to you every day. That wasn't easy for me. Not even once. It hit me then, truly hit me. She had never stopped being my wife, she had just been something more, something secret, at the same time. And now I was part of it, whether I liked it or not. But it wasn't just about Tess and me anymore. There was something more urgent she needed to tell me. There's something else, she said, sitting down next to me. We think Judith knows. I froze. Knows what? That something's off. That I'm not who I claim to be. The police visit last week? That wasn't just a noise complaint. It was a test. She wanted to see how I handled pressure, how I reacted to official scrutiny. And you, failed? I asked, my throat dry. Maybe, she said. I handled it too well. Like a prosecutor, not like a suburban wife who runs a consulting business. If Judith's paying attention, and she is, then that moment may have given me away. I let that sink in. My wife was undercover, and our neighbor, Judith Merrill, neighborhood tyrant and aspiring mayor, was potentially onto her. And now, we were out of time. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means we make our move soon. Or everything we've worked for falls apart. That was the beginning of my new reality. From that moment forward, my role shifted from blissfully ignorant spouse to co-conspirator in a federal operation. I didn't sign up for this. But Tess was my wife, and if she was taking down an entire municipal corruption ring, I wasn't about to let her do it alone. The next morning, everything felt surreal. I looked at the breakfast table, coffee, toast, the usual, and realized it was now part of a cover operation. I was part of a cover operation. Tess sat across from me, calm, collected, flipping through her tablet like any normal morning. Just be yourself, she said without looking up. That's all you have to do. Easy for you to say, I replied. You've been trained for this. What if Judith asks about your work again? Stick to the legal consulting story. If she pushes, just pivot the conversation. Bring up HOA paint colors or something mundane. She'll get bored. And what if she asks specifics? I said, gripping my coffee mug like a lifeline. She won't. Criminals don't like to ask too many questions about other people's business. It makes them nervous. That thought gave me a strange kind of comfort. Apparently, even people committing federal crimes have social anxiety about being nosy. But Judith wasn't just any criminal. She was methodical, manipulative, and ambitious. Her campaign for mayor was gaining traction, and she had been using our non-involvement in the community as political ammunition. At every HOA meeting, every barbecue, she'd drop hints. Some people don't understand the meaning of civic responsibility, she'd say, locking eyes with us as we sipped lemonade. When I'm mayor, I'll make sure everyone contributes to the community's success. The message wasn't subtle. It was a threat. Tess would just smile and nod, taking it all in like she was listening to a recipe. Later, she'd tell me that Judith's speeches were loaded with clues about how her scheme worked. The rhetoric about civic duty was just code for compliance, coercing residents into participating in her corruption web. And now that I knew what was really going on, everything looked different. Every time Tess asked a neighbor a casual question, I realized she was actually gathering intelligence. You had work done on your street? Which contractor did the city use? Or, that park renovation looks expensive, do you know what the budget was for that project? She remembered every answer, every detail. I started paying attention, too. At my repair shop, I overheard things. When you fix enough typewriters, people open up. They ramble. They vent. And if you listen carefully, you catch things. Like how the print shop owner told me about a signage contract that cost the city 3 times what he would have charged. Or how the woman who ran the coffee shop mentioned a $50,000 contract to count parking meter usage. 50 grand to count cars. I said, and she just shrugged. That's government for you. But it wasn't just government inefficiency. Now I understood, it was theft, plain and simple. Systematic, strategic, and widespread. One by one, the pieces fell into place. The bakery owner had lost a catering contract to a shell company with no storefront and inflated prices. The hardware store guy complained about losing city business to an out-of-state firm hired to fix door handles, because they supposedly met specialized municipal requirements. His air quotes told me everything I needed to know. The more I listened, the more I uncovered. And every night, Tess and I pieced the puzzle together. Shell companies with no employees. Contract winners with shady ties. Municipalities awarding inflated contracts to the same small circle of vendors. How much money are we talking about? I asked one night as Tess typed up a report. In this city alone? About $2.3 million over the last 3 years. But the whole network spans 6 municipalities. I whistled. That's enough to get serious federal time. We're not just talking fraud, she said. We're talking racketeering. Conspiracy. Wire fraud. Possibly even obstruction of justice. But the financial crimes were only half the story. Tess explained how the network used intimidation to keep everyone in line. Small businesses that asked too many questions found themselves suddenly failing inspections or losing licenses. City employees who raised red flags were reassigned or let go. And residents who didn't participate, people like us, became targets for public shaming or political pressure. Now I understood why Judith was so hostile to us. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was trying to neutralize a threat. The tension kept rising. One morning, at the mailbox, Judith approached me. "Your wife works from home, right?" she asked, casually enough. "Yeah," I said. "Just business consulting. Pretty boring." "She seems to know a lot about municipal law for someone doing business consulting," she said, watching me closely. My heart skipped a beat. Before I could respond, Tess appeared at my side like she'd sensed the danger. "I used to work for a firm that handled government contracts," she said smoothly. "You pick up procurement law and compliance stuff after a while." Judith's face twitched, just slightly. She didn't like that answer. But she nodded and walked away. After she was gone, Tess was quiet for a long time. "She's getting suspicious," she finally said. "We need to move." "Move where?" "Not move," she said. "We need to act. Go on the offensive. Before she shuts this whole thing down and disappears." And so that's where we are now, sitting on a powder keg of evidence, surrounded by neighbors we no longer see as neighbors, but as players in a corruption drama. Tess is more than my wife, she's a federal prosecutor running one of the most delicate undercover operations I can imagine. And me? I fix typewriters by day and help my undercover wife dismantle a criminal enterprise by night. I didn't sign up for this. But I'm in it now. And I'm not backing out. From the very first moment Tess told me she would have to start carrying her service weapon, an austere matte black pistol that looked absurdly out of place next to the floral lining of her leather tote, the whole situation shifted from cloak and dagger intrigue to something brutally tangible. That gun, heavier and more intimidating than any prop in a courtroom drama, hammered home a truth I could no longer push to the back of my mind. Our quiet little lakeside life was over, at least for now. Night after night she checked the deadbolt twice, varied the route to the grocery store, and paused in mid-conversation to scan for cars that might be following us. I finally asked, "Are we actually in danger?" Tess, trying to soothe me, said, "Probably not." But then she added, almost as an afterthought, that people who embezzle millions in federal money rarely submit to arrest with polite handshakes. Living inside an undercover investigation turned out to be the most stressful improved class on earth. There was no script, no rehearsal, and no safety net. If you missed a line or answered a question the wrong way, you didn't just ruin the scene, you risked alerting a conspiracy of white-collar criminals who protected their profits as fiercely as any street gang. Yet the strangest part was how normal everything else remained. I still spent my afternoons replacing worn feed rollers and polishing typewriter carriages. Tess and I still bickered affectionately about whether to order Thai or pizza. We still curled up on the couch on Saturday nights to watch mindless action movies. The ordinary sounds of life, the click of keys, the gurgle of the coffee maker, the creak of the porch swing, coexisted with an electric undercurrent of tension, as though a violinist were drawing a frayed bowstring beneath every mundane noise. And Tess kept saying the tipping point was coming soon. Judith Pike, our HOA president, our neighbor, and, allegedly, the spider at the center of the municipal kickback web, was barreling toward election day with swaggering confidence. The local polls showed her leading the mayoral race by 15 points, and she had managed to mark us publicly as the neighborhood malcontents who refused to participate in community values. Every time she repeated that phrase at a block party or HOA meeting, I felt an invisible spotlight swing in our direction. "Judith's getting sloppy," Tess murmured one afternoon, scrolling through a spreadsheet of campaign expenditures. Her tone had changed in the last week, quicker, more brittle. When criminals think they're about to win, they relax their operational security. That's when they slip. I asked how much longer we'd have to live in this state of suspended animation. Tess checked her watch as if an actual countdown were ticking. "Not long," she said. "She'll overplay her hand in public. When she does, we'll have what we need to arrest her." The showdown arrived sooner than I expected. Judith announced what she called her final HOA town hall before assuming mayoral duties, a thinly veiled victory lap scheduled for the Tuesday evening 2 weeks before the election. The community center's multipurpose room, usually reserved for toddler gymnastics and bake sale overflow, became a miniature campaign arena lined with glossy red, white and blue posters bearing Judith's smiling face. The air smelled of crock-pot chili, buttered dinner rolls, and the faint chemical tang of fresh toner from her mailer handouts. Tess dressed with painstaking care, plain slacks, neutral blouse, hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, and hefted her laptop bag by the shoulder strap. I noticed it sagged lower than usual. Later I would learn the weight came from an evidence binder and a locking holster. "After tonight," she whispered while straightening my collar, "everything changes." We took our seats in the back row as neighbors filed in, Mr. Lawson clutching a clipboard, the Hendersons whispering excitedly, teenagers lingering by the snack table. Judith swept to the podium in a tailored suit the color of fresh asphalt and called the meeting to order by banging a ceremonial gavel. She launched into her stump speech, praising efficient fiscal stewardship and promising to redirect municipal funds into high-impact partnerships with responsive local vendors. To anyone else, it sounded like generic campaign boilerplate. To Tess, it was practically a signed confession. I watched my wife in profile, her face looked serene, but the tendons in her neck were taut. Every so often she tapped notes into her phone. She was listening for the moment Judith inadvertently exposed the shell companies, Pike Municipal Services, Riverside Contracting, Summit Administrative Solutions, entities that existed mainly on paper to funnel inflated contracts back to a ring of conspirators. Then Judith committed the fatal error Tess had predicted. Riding the warm buzz of hometown applause, she bragged, "Through my HOA leadership, I've already partnered with reputable firms like Pike Municipal Services, Riverside Contracting, and Summit Administrative Solutions, quality vendors who bring true value to taxpayers. The words left her mouth like champagne corks. By the time she realized their weight, they were already echoing off the acoustic tiles. Tess raised her hand. Her voice, when Judith acknowledged her, was mild and cordial. Could you elaborate on how those firms were evaluated against other bidders? Judith blinked, forced a smile, and said, experience, competitive pricing, the usual metrics. But her composure faltered. Sweat bloomed at her hairline. Tess continued, and how long have these relationships been in place? Months? Years? Judith's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, but how do you know those names? Suspicion curled in her tone like smoke. Tess set her phone on the chair, stood, and in one deliberate motion produced a badge from her blazer pocket. The fluorescent lighting caught the gold crest. Time seemed to dilate. I heard a styrofoam cup crumple to the linoleum, felt every head swivel toward us as though guided by a single motor. Teresa Hayward, Assistant United States Attorney, she announced, her voice filling the room. Judith Pike, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal fraud and theft of government funds. Silence detonated across the crowd. Then the rear doors of the community center swung open and 3 plainclothes agents strode in, square-jawed, earpieces glinting. Mrs. Henderson clapped a hand over her mouth. Mr. Lawson whispered, "Good heavens." Judith's knees seemed to lock. Her gavel thudded to the floor. "This is entrapment," she hissed, voice jagged. "You spies moved here to sabotage me." "We moved here," Tess replied, calm as snowfall, "because you, and your associates in 6 municipalities, have siphoned millions intended for schools and parks. Your campaign only accelerated our timeline." As the agents closed in, Judith erupted, flinging her campaign flyers like oversized confetti, screaming that she would sue every last one of us. The agents guided her wrists behind her back, reciting Miranda rights she tried to shout over. "You have the right to remain silent," Tess reminded her. "I recommend you use it."